Stop trying to make fetch happen. It's not going to happen.
I don't know, Regina. It might have just happened. Hey, what's happening, everyone? Pragmatic Addict here. So I just got out of my screener of seeing the new Mean Girls movie. So I had some real mixed thoughts on this one. Before I get into the actual review, I got some shit to say. So I am a huge fan of the original 2004 film. Like, I can quote the damn thing front to back. And that is not at all a flex. This is a cult film. Everybody can quote this movie. If you've seen Mean Girls and you liked it, you know the movie. And before even seeing the trailer, I had heard somewhere that Tina Fey and Tim Meadows would be working on a new Mean Girls film, and that's not like the worst thing that you can hear when you first get the knowledge that a new Mean Girls film is getting made. But yes, eventually I did see the trailer and I really didn't know at all what to think. First off, yes, addressing the elephant in the room, this is kind of like a shot-for-shot remake somewhat of the original film, while also being an adaptation of the Broadway musical, with, yes, having a modern day spin on the whole thing. And if you're not comfortable with me labeling this a remake, fine. It's a full-length Easter egg of the 2004 film. Whatever you want to call this film, do that. Now, I had actually read somewhere that there were going to be, in total, 12 songs in this film in comparison to the 21 songs that were in the Broadway musical. And I'm just gonna say, after seeing the trailer several times with like all the movies that I saw in theaters leading up to this one, those songs started to get stuck in my head a little bit. Also, just the characters. People like Janice and Damien and Regina George and even like Katie Heron, just like the embodies of the original like characters, as well as the premiere that just happened a few days ago for this film, because I have more or less been keeping in the loop of like the buzz about this film, and holy shit, man, my fucking heart. I kind of did a complete 180 as far as like what I was expecting going into this film. And lastly, the voice of Moana, Alili Cruvalho, she's fucking Janice in this movie. I was really looking forward to this film for what it was, for all the buzz and the nostalgia factor behind it, with it being a musical. I was as excited for this film going into it as I possibly could have been. So with my initial reactions and like thoughts and how it overall delivered in like conclusion, well, let's talk about that, guys. Also, real quickly, before my screener started, we did get like a little behind the scenes video, which I'm really glad we got, because this would have just thrown me for a loop the entire movie, and I would have had to fucking force myself to get used to it while also trying to just take in the movie. And that is that Gretchen and Karen, I thought the actresses that portrayed these characters in this film were actually switched just because of like the skin tones and like, you know, based off of like the original 2004 film. They're not. This one's Karen, this one's Gretchen. Had to get used to that, now you guys know. So first off, the first scene in this movie, as well as the musical number, for someone who is expecting this film to almost be somewhat of like a copy and paste of the original Mean Girls movie, this movie actually does open up with a musical number featuring Janice and Damien, which that was just really exciting to me, because these were like two of the like mainer characters that I was really looking forward to more than anything. And just that alone, getting that firsthand before anything, hearing Ali Cravalho's musical talents as Janice Ian, as well as getting the first taste, the first like glimpse of Damien's character in this film. Not the intro that I expected, but I really appreciated. But damn, that first song and like the first glimpse of like how the musical numbers are going to be handled in this film, I was like, oh yeah, this is a fucking musical. Like, it breathes that life, where it's like, I haven't seen High School Musical personally, but this is kind of what I could expect if like High School Musical was a PG-13 Mean Girls like story. And just based off that first song, I really didn't know again how this would land for me, because again, I did hear that there were in total 12 songs in this movie, and just that first one, maybe it's just because it came out a little bit too strong as far as the transitions between being a musical and cutting back to this like Mean Girls remake, which I will say, the music in this movie, it's that case where just in general as a film, it's probably better than like the shit it's getting online. Like, things aren't gonna stand out as much as the iconic original film, like humor or characters or performances, as well as just this being a musical. There were songs that stood out from the crowd and ones that just didn't really land for me, ones that didn't really feel necessary. But for those wondering, because I'm sure there are people that are like, you know, wondering what were my favorite tunes, my favorite as a musical number was actually a piece that took place during the Halloween party scene. And that is just simply because it was the most hardcore, non-Mean Girls musical sounding song in the movie. It had some like really killer drums. It had a really dark like aesthetic that just I just kind of dug it. I kind of ate it up for what it was. Even though initially how it started, again, how the film transitions in and out of these musical numbers between like being a Mean Girls musical and just being a Mean Girls remake, it is janky and is definitely something to get used to, but just as an actual scene as far as the musical number, Revenge Party was definitely the standout to me in the entire film. But one thing that I really want to note is actually the humor in this film. So throughout the movie, the film does play like really playful homage to the original film's like jokes and everything, except like just changing up the dialogue and punchlines so that it kind of feels familiar and like respectful of the original Mean Girls, but also trying to be its own thing. Like in the original Mean Girls, there's that scene where Regina's like, "Shut up," and Katie's like, "I didn't say anything." It has instances of that like awkward, dry humor that the original Mean Girls was like very full of. Like, for example, there's this one scene where a teacher says to Katie, "No way, Jose," and she's like, "My name's Katie." That's obviously just a like loose Easter egg and like nod to the scene I stated like earlier from the original film. But just at the start of the movie, in the intro and in the whole like first day of like Katie going to school and everything, and just in general, the movie's pacing just moves a bit faster than I would have personally preferred. But what helped all of like the clunkiness as far as like pacing was that, again, it was filled with just playful nods to the original, and again, just characters that were pretty close to the embodiments of like the original characters, especially like Janice and Damien, for example, which again show up right at the start, and it just makes you just love them so fast. But goddamn, one thing the movie did amazing with was actually Regina George's like character's intro. And now that I'm just saying that, it kind of makes sense to me. I'm like, well, Regina George, she's fucking Regina George in Mean Girls. Obviously, like her introduction is gonna be an event. Like maybe they're gonna try a little bit harder with it, but even with this scene, like when the movie transitions into this and like when the musical number goes back into just the film as like a regular teen film, it still just feels a bit off, which is honestly probably like my biggest issue, which obviously doesn't help with like already the film's kind of clunky pacing. But it's just one of those things where the best way I can describe it is that you gotta get used to it. When the music is incorporated, it feels fine. And that was like the biggest question I had, was like going into it, I was like, how much is this film gonna like stand out between being a musical and just being like a modern day Mean Girls remake, more or less? What I can say is that when the film is being a musical, I think it's fine. And when it's being that like Mean Girls modern remake, it's also doing fine. It's just the balance between like the two merging into one film, that's where it feels a little bit off. But whether it's focused on being a musical or just focused on being like a new Mean Girls film, I think it does fine with whatever it's going for in the moment. Again, it just moves a little bit faster than I feel it should. It's kind of that thing where it feels like it's just going a little bit over the speed limit, but not just like a little bit. Like it's like a noticeable degree, like to the point where, say, like we're at the Halloween scene, right? Let me try and paint this picture the best I can. The Halloween scene in this movie is 30 minutes or so into the movie. The movie in full is 2 hours long. Try and piece that together. Also, there are a lot of scenes in this movie, but just in general how the film overall feels, it feels more so like an adaptation of a play, or sometimes it just feels like a play, as far as like, you know, with a film that like this, that is so big in acting and like reactions and drama, it feels sometimes a bit too overacted and dramatic, even for like what it is being a Mean Girls musical. But this isn't all the characters. Again, like I said in the beginning, the main characters, again, like Janice, Ian, Damien, Regina, they are absolutely the standouts in this film, and not just like in general as characters, but like even when it does go into the musical numbers. For example, and this is a pretty distracting issue of the movie. So obviously, like, the singing is like pre-recorded voice work that the actors have done, but like when they are acting and like doing the musical numbers on screen and like they're lip syncing their own songs, they don't really match. And just again, as musical numbers in the song, to whatever degree, sometimes the songs just don't land. Sometimes the choreography is off. Whatever it is that like doesn't land with some of these musical numbers, still like Regina George, Janice Ian, Damien, like the ones where they're all in, oh, how well casted they were for this film. And touching more so on the characters, going into like ones like, for example, Gretchen and Karen. So obviously in the original film, kind of everybody stood out, whether it was the teachers or Aaron Samuels or the plastics or Janice and fucking Damien. They all kind of stood out in a way that felt like they incorporated a significant piece to making the movie feel as, you know, whole as it was. What I can say in this film is that, again, it's to the degree where certain things are fine. For example, in this film, yeah, Gretchen and Karen, they're still Gretchen and Karen, like, even when it's incorporating that modern humor. For example, Katie Heron in this movie, she's from Kenya, and Karen, the dumb one, she's like, oh, I made you a Spotify playlist of songs that are, you know, that will help with culture. It's like, I get where they're going for, but Karen and Gretchen in this film, they're just not as iconic as Karen or Gretchen in the original. Neither is Aaron Samuels. Even Tina Fey and Tim Meadows back in this film, it was fine for like nostalgia bullshit, but even like more so than anything, it does feel like that like cash grab material performance where it's like, again, I knew that they were gonna be in this film, and it kind of feels like that based off of like how it felt as far as like delivery. They just don't feel as in tune or as genuine as they did in the original. Although, and I'm not gonna spoil this, but there is a specific character arc for these two that you could tell was just fully for the fans, and it just worked, man. Everyone in that theater was hyped as shit for this. But going back into the humor in this film, and this goes again to it being like a whole modern spin on it, there are times where they do things with, for example, like hashtags and TikTok and shit, and sometimes it works, sometimes it feels like fair and necessary and mindful, but there are also those jokes that just fall completely like into the cringe category, where with this film's already off transition and its long runtime, you just feel like if things were condensed and jokes were like excluded, it could really just feel like a much more balanced film, even like so far as like making the characters that didn't really do much for me in this film, it could have made them actually stand out that much more. Even with the songs, there are only, again, like 12 songs in this film out of the original 21 where I'm like, that did not need to be in this film. And also, like I said earlier, this film is kind of like a full-length Easter egg to the original film. There are instances of like fan favorite jokes from the original that are addressed in this film where honestly, they just did nothing with it. They just put them in this film to reference them, and they just did them completely dirty. Just did the bare minimum with it, and it just felt like, dude, how? How did you make that land so fucking flat? There's also an iCarly joke in this movie that happens during the talent show segment where I'm like, why is that here? Why? I mean, fine, whatever, funny and awkward for what you're doing with it. And then I'm like, oh yeah, it's a Paramount movie. I don't know how that benefits this review, but it's in this movie. Also, I wasn't expecting this just based off of like how we've gotten with this movie so far, but how that whole talent show segment wraps up, I actually thought it was great cinematically, which is fine, like as a standalone scene, but talking about this one, like, for example, the Regina George scenes, speaking about it just makes me realize that it's just that case where you can tell that there are scenes where they tried hardest with, but going into something that I was really curious as to like how they would tackle it, and that is like the whole thing with like Regina and Janice, where like Regina calls Janice a lesbian and everything. Obviously, in today's society with a movie like this, they aren't gonna go to that extent in this movie, but what I will say is that like how the film plays out with that, they still tackle that. It's just not safer per se, but it's more mindful with a PG-13 self-aware movie that this is. Bottom line is, when the film is being a musical, I think it works fine with me just being a little bit loose critically, as well as when it is just being a teen film. Again, it's when the two genres merge together as this being one film where it feels the most off balance. And I'm gonna give Mean Girls 2024 a high mixed to a pass. Better than I thought it was going to be, but I'm just not gonna watch this film again when I could just watch the original. With all that being said, guys, I've been Pragmatic Addict. Thank you guys so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next one. Take care.